So this economic impact, these market crashes, the oil price plunge, the impact of coronavirus, all making things very difficult for governments, which are planning and which are, in some cases, putting together budgets, including the Liberal government, which is preparing its first minority budget. Let's go to Janice McGregor, who's in Ottawa, looking at all of this. The finance minister asked some questions about whether this is going to have any bearing on what he's preparing for the 2020 budget. Janice, what is Bill Morneau saying?
Yeah, and very interesting to hear him say yesterday, Heather, encourage us not to think of the budget as an event, but painting the government's likely response to this kind of coronavirus issue writ large as an ongoing response, something that would roll out over time, not just be focused on some future federal budget for which we actually don't have a date yet. He suggested last week that as early as this week, we would see the first elements of his government's response. I think we expect it to offer some kind of help for workers who have either found themselves sick, in isolation, in quarantine, because of exposure or illness from the virus itself, or other workers who find themselves displaced, laid off, somehow their jobs disrupted. Maybe they're in the tourism industry, the demand isn't there, the energy sector, as you were just saying, the prices have collapsed. Or other people who may be facing supply chain issues. You know, their particular business may rely on stuff from China. Those factories are shut, so their business not operating as usual either, perhaps in the coming weeks. Here's Bill Morneau talking about the depths of these challenges.
We recognize that there are sectors of our economy that are going to go through real challenges because of the changes right now. So that is clear in the tourism sector, it's clear in the energy sector, and we'll be looking at how we can make sure that we are appropriately dealing with those challenges.
So how do you help those workers? Well, Morneau has talked about how the employment insurance system has responded well to challenges in the past, but of course, it only helps kind of salaried employees. It serves them well, but what about other people, contract workers, entrepreneurs, the self-employed, people for whom if they don't work, they don't get paid? Would they need some kind of a lump sum compensation program for those sorts of people if they find themselves, for example, in a coronavirus-related quarantine situation? The other thing that seems very likely to be coming in the short term, targeted resources for the healthcare sector. The federal government put in writing a request to the provinces yesterday to get their wish lists together so that when the first ministers meet at the end of this week, they can actually figure out what needs to be purchased, what that response needs to look like to make sure that the health sector is properly equipped for the coming weeks ahead. Finally, on that federal budget, you know, big picture, I think some stimulus spending, perhaps more infrastructure programming, highly likely. Borrowing is cheap these days with those interest rates so low. And you look at a province like Ontario, Doug Ford yesterday said he was going to come to Ottawa with his ministers like stormtroopers to get the kind of funding they want for public transit projects. The time is ripe for making that pitch. That is the sort of thing that helps stimulate the economy through this kind of a downturn.
So, Janice, when you mention Ontario, let's talk about a couple of other provinces, Newfoundland and Labrador. They're in pre-budget consultations. These economic upheavals, drop in oil price, that's a big concern there. We're talking about Quebec's budget today. Will it contain any coronavirus provisions? And in Alberta, people are particularly concerned about this precipitous drop in the oil price. What is the Alberta government saying?
Yeah, this is going to be a fiscal shock for the government of Alberta. Literally, with every drop in the price of oil, they can shave off several hundred millions of dollars in resource revenues from their budget. Alberta's companies are already quite lean. They already laid off a lot of workers. Alberta's books, however, are really going to feel this. Here's Premier Jason Kenney talking to reporters yesterday.
I understand this is the first time since 1930 that the world has seen a significant decline in energy demand met concurrently with a significant increase in energy supply. We are in uncharted territory.
So Kenney said yesterday he's got several asks. He wants federal help to clean up orphaned oil wells, a huge issue in that province. Also some push from Alberta about payroll taxes, similar to the demands that you were just talking about in the U.S. for that kind of assistance. But the big ask is for a fix to the stabilization fund, something that could be worth several $billions to Alberta's economy. Morneau saying that kind of change is coming in the pretty near term, although it's not clear whether Alberta will get exactly what it wants on that. But the federal government wants to get that system more responsive to the sort of shocks that we've seen over the last couple days. But beyond that, I think the federal government would also like to build into its next budget some kind of transition funding to get Alberta and other provinces in Western Canada that depend on resource revenues off this kind of roller coaster that they're on, transition them into something that might be more stable in the long term, and also, frankly, help the federal government meet some of its climate change targets.
Janice, thank you very much. Big matters before various levels of government. And Janice McGregor there with our report in Ottawa today.